Hi there, my name is Daniel. I am a tutor for HACC, and here I'm going to be showing you how to use MegaStat add-on for Excel in order to use it for Math 202, which is Intro to Statistics. You should have this zip file that you downloaded that has the MegaStat setup. It should be either in your Downloads folder on your desktop, but when you find it, you will want to double-click it, and it will have these three files inside of it. And you just double click on the MegaStat one that says it is a Microsoft Excel add-in. And it will open Excel and pop up this box here about a security concern. This is okay. We know it is going to do this. You want to enable macros, and then it will have your add-in installed. If you click on add-ins and then MegaStat, you will find everything you need right here. Now, it does occasionally disappear from your Excel, and if that happens, you just want to exit out of your Excel and go back to the MegaStat and double click it again, and it will install it again. Now, one of the first things you may end up doing with MegaStat is get a summary statistics from a list of values you may have. It's usually easy to import them into Excel from either MyMathLab or MyOpenMath. Once the numbers are in, you can go to MegaStat and Descriptive Statistics. It brings up this box here. Important things to see are the input range, which is the cells you are telling it to get the numbers from. And what you can do is you can either type the numbers in directly if you know how to do that, or if you click on the range, there's a bar there, and you can click and drag to select whatever range of numbers you want to get the statistics for. Once you have them selected, you can send it back to the dialog box, and here it gives you a list of all the different things you might be interested in. The 5-number summary, which is what you will be doing most of the time, is our mean, minimum, maximum, the range, and standard deviation. And when you have those selected, hit OK. It will pop up into this output sheet here what your values are for all those. It will give you the count, the mean of the numbers in the range, variance, standard deviation, min, max, range, everything you need there. Now, when you are doing MegaStat things, it will output things onto the end of whatever you were producing last. So you want to make sure you don't get confused with different listings in the output. Like here I had done the statistics before, and here I did it again, and then here's where I generated the numbers. You don't have to worry about that, but just make sure that you look at the end of this output window to see what you requested. After you have finished with your output, to get back to your original data, you would just want to go to sheet 1, or if you had changed the name, it would show up there. But that will take you back to your original data, and you can do whatever else you need with it. For instance, if you wanted to look at some visual summaries of the data, many of those are also under descriptive statistics. So here we could do a box plot of our data. We can do a stem and leaf plot, and we can hit OK then. And again, it will here in our output show the results of those graphs. Here we've got our stem and leaf plot. It shows all the values, stems and leaves. And then we also have our box plot. Shows our mean here in the middle and each of our quartiles. So you can get all of your displays done that way. Now, some of the graphs you might need are actually built into Excel already without the MegaStat add-on. For those, you can go into the Insert tab here, and under Recommended Charts, you can look in and there is a listing of different types of charts. You can go to all charts to see all the different types here that they have. The most common ones are the column or bar charts, which if you want to create one of those, you would select it, hit OK. It will automatically take the data and put it into a bar chart. You can also very easily get a pie chart, which would show the proportions of all the different data points. This is not a good way to show this particular data set, but there are all these options here if you wanted to use any of those. Now, MegaStat will give you a good histogram for this, but it is not under the descriptive statistics. This one would be under frequency distributions. And if we go to quantitative, because we're dealing with quantities, we would want to select our input range again. And once that is selected, send it back to the box. And here, if we wanted to, we could put in a width and lower boundary for our bins, or we can leave it blank for it to automatically do it. We can select our histogram here, or there's also polygon or ogive, which you may have heard of. Hit OK, and this box is in the way. You can move everything out of the way, no problem. And here is our frequency distribution right here. Now, this will not actually give you the graph for the histogram by default. What you can do if you need the graph is go back to your sheet, and you have your data there, and you can use the default histogram under all charts, and there's a histogram here, and we can use that to generate the bars. Now, this also will automatically estimate the bin sizes, but if you just need the chart and the numbers, this works great. Now, moving on to correlation, something you might want to do is have a scatter plot of two different data sets. So you can do that in MegaStat. You would want to go to the correlation regression section, and then we have scatter plot. And for this one, we want to select both our horizontal axis, our X, and our vertical axis, our Y. So you could do the same thing. You select it in the same way. And once you have both selected, you want to make sure this plot linear regression line is selected, and you can hit OK. Now, this is something that will happen often for some of these functions, is it will say there is an error, but you don't have to worry about that. It worked fine. You just have to hit OK, and it will take you over to our output sheet. And another thing it does often is it will overlay graphs on top of each other. So if you need to see what's underneath it for any reason, you could just grab the chart and move it around. All right. So now looking at our scatter plot here, we have our X values on the bottom, our Y values on the left. All of our dots have been plotted here, and it has also given us the line of best fit and the equation for the line. Now, it's a little hard to see because of that dot in the way, but we have our equation and the R squared value. So we can get all of that information off of one chart from this. Now moving on to probability, there isn't a whole lot that MegaStat adds for us for that. But if you do go to the probability section here, under counting rules, we can get factorials, permutations, combinations calculated for us. You can put the values in you would want. And a tip for some of these is when you see this preview button on the bottom, if you click that, it will give you the result without having to close out of this dialog box. So this is a handy way to just get the result right away without having to worry about going to the output sheet. So if you need those calculated, it can be done here. It's not hard to do them in the calculator though, so it may not be worth it. And that's really all it has for basic probability. So for discrete probability distributions, MegaStat will be very useful for that. Both of those are going to be under the probability tab. And instead of counting rules, you're going to go to this discrete probability distributions. Inside of here, the ones we care about are the binomial and the Poisson. And these are very simple. For binomial, put in your number of trials and your probability of each occurrence. Check display graph if you want to see the graph for it. Hit OK. It's going to give you that error, but it's not really an error. And the graph is in the way. Let's see. But here is our binomial distribution for 100 events and 0.88 probability. So you can go through, it will show you both the probability of that many events. Like here, this one is probability of having exactly 22. And it will also have the cumulative probability. So you can see here where we're actually getting some values. For 90, there's a 10.8% chance of getting exactly 90. But cumulatively, so 90 or less, the probability is 77.4. So you could get all of the numbers you need for a binomial distribution, as well as, we go back, Poisson. All the Poisson needs is the mean rate. And again, hit OK. And, oh yeah, here was our graph for the binomial distribution. And you can see the shape of that. And then for our Poisson, here are our values. It does it in the same way. We've got each x, the probability of that x, and then the cumulative probability. And also our graph here. So that should be all of the information you would need for any discrete probability distributions. Moving on to continuous probability distributions, you can go to MegaStat probability. And here we want continuous probability distributions. And the ones we care about right now is just the normal distribution. And this gives you two different ways to do things here. If we have a z-score that we're given, we can type in that number for the z, make sure we have our mean and our standard deviation. And again, here on the bottom is this preview button. We can click that, and this will give us the range. So for a distribution with a mean of 0 and standard deviation of 1, 0.5, the area to the left of that is going to be 0.6915. The area to the right of that is going to be 0.3085. Now we could go the other way around, where if we have a probability, like let's say 70%, and we have a mean and standard deviation. Again, we can just hit the preview, and this tells us that 70% would be below a z-score of negative 0.52. Now, when you're doing these normal distributions and you're given just the numbers, it can be a little difficult to see what exactly it is trying to display to you. So I'm going to do a little visual demonstration here. For instance, here is our normal distribution with a mean of 0. Standard deviation is 1. So we are looking at our z-score of 0.5, which would be roughly around there somewhere. So that is the line we're looking at. And what these results do is divide it up into the left side and the right side. So here, this P lower is going to be that area to the left, 0.6915. So this whole area, the probability of that is that 69.15%. And the same for the right side, it's going to be the 0.3085. And then going the other way around then, if you're trying to find the z with a given probability, what this is saying is that if I have this curve and I already know that I've got 70% of my observations here on the left, and this will only do things on the left here, what it tells me is that the z-score that gives me that is the negative 0.52. After normal probability distributions, we start looking at confidence intervals. And this is one that does have some advantages over the calculator, actually. So if we go to MegaStat, and there's an option here for confidence intervals / sample size. And there's a lot of different tabs you can check here. So for any of these, you would want to find out what category you're doing. If you're doing a confidence interval, you want to see if you're dealing with the mean or the proportion. And whichever one you would want to put in our values. Mean, standard deviation, whatever your sample size is. And then you can select what confidence level you're looking at. And again, we have our preview button on the bottom here. Hit that, and it gives you your lower and upper right away. And it's that easy. You would do the same thing with the proportion confidence interval. And it will give you the values for that. Now, what's nice about MegaStat here is it will also provide the sample size formulas. So if we're given a particular margin of error and a standard deviation, it will give us what sample size we would need in order to make that. And we could do it for the mean or for the proportion. All of these work the same way, and they tend to be pretty easy to use. Now we're getting into hypothesis testing, and these can get a little bit complicated. Starting out, we want to go to MegaStat, and under hypothesis tests, our initial one is our mean versus hypothesized. This is our basic test. So we have two options for how it's going to get the information. Either we can get it from the raw data, or we could get it from a summary of the data. The raw data would just be the numbers by themselves. If we're not given a mean or anything, just a list of numbers, we would use this. So you would go back to select the range. Once it's in, we would put in what our hypothesized mean is, our hypothesis, what our alternative is. Optionally, you can have it display confidence interval here as well, but then you would hit OK, and it will generate this over in the output sheet, where it has the information from the data set. It gives us our calculated test statistic as well as our p-value. So that is everything we would need to make a hypothesis test. If we were going to do it with summary, it's a little more complicated because it needs the information in a specific order. Namely, it needs a label, then the mean, then the standard deviation, then the n. If we have it all there in that order, we can go to hypothesis tests, mean versus hypothesized. Under summary input, we would want to select the range that has those values. So here we're going to just select those 4 cells, take it back. We're going to do the same hypothesis and alternative. So hit OK. And here it gives us the same values. Now the hypothesis test with a proportion is done very similarly, but there are some changes. So under hypothesis tests, we would have proportion versus hypothesized value. And in here, it doesn't give us a choice of summary or data. This really only goes off of the summary. So if we are in a situation where we only have the data, we might want to go in and get our descriptive statistics first. Select the input range. And here under our descriptive statistics then, we would need our mean and our count. So I have our mean here. We are going to go back to our hypothesis tests, proportion versus hypothesized. So our observed mean is going to be the 0.5485 out of 20 observations. And we would put in our hypothesized and our alternative. Hit OK. And that gives you the results of that. We have our z-value and our p. That's all you would need for a proportion test. And then for 2 sample tests, we would go under MegaStat, hypothesis tests. And here we would have comparing 2 independent groups if we're dealing with the means, and compare 2 independent proportions if we're dealing with proportions. Here I've got means, so we have the same situation here. We can either do our data input and select each group one at a time. This is for the raw data. We would put in our hypothesized difference, our alternative, and we would hit OK. And this will give us the results of our 2 sample test, t-value and our p-value. If we wanted to do it instead with the summary, we would again have to put things in a specific order. The label, mean, standard deviation, and number for each group, and have each of those separately. Going through hypothesis tests and compare 2 independent groups. Summary input. And we would select each group of the summary information. Once we have those, we can make sure the rest of our information is in correctly. Hit OK. And it gives us the same values. So those are the 2 ways to do the means. And then if we had a proportion, it would be similar to the 1 sample proportion, where we've got the values for each group. and it would give us the same thing, z-score, p-value. We can use that to make our decision on the hypothesis. Now, MegaStat also has an option for doing a paired test, paired observations here. We could just as easily do it as a one sample test with the differences, but we can do it this way as well. And going in with that, it's exactly the same as the two sample. We would get our data in each group here. Make sure our difference is in there, the alternative, hit OK, and it will calculate test statistic and p-value. For chi-squared tests, most commonly we will see a goodness of fit test, where we're comparing some expected to an observed. In this case, under MegaStat, we would want to go to chi-square instead of hypothesis tests. And under that tab, we have goodness of fit test. We would want to select our observed values into one input, our expected into another, and then we would hit OK, and it gives us the results of our chi-square test. The hardest part of this is setting up the data in the table correctly. It can include the headings, but should not include any totals. The other chi-square test you might want to do is under contingency table, and this would be a test for independence. You would want to select the range of your table, and the only option we really care about is chi-squared, so you can hit OK. And again, it gives you the results of the chi-square test with the test statistic and p-value. Finally, students may or may not get to this, but the last one is the ANOVA test. That is comparing 3 or more different means, or 3 or more different groups. And that is actually rather easy to do in MegaStat. Go up to MegaStat. We're looking at analysis of variance. That's what ANOVA stands for. So we're doing one factor ANOVA. All we have to do is select the input range with all 3 or more of our groups. We don't have to change anything else here. Hit OK. And it gives us a lot of information here. What we're mostly interested here is our ANOVA table. It gives us our F-score and our p-value. Also, if needed, it does plot the comparison of groups together if your students need to see that. So that's about it. If you have any other questions about Excel functions or MegaStat functions, please get a hold of me. My email is available, and I hope you found this useful. Thank you so much.